My first guest on Keeping It Off is William Anderson. In his early 30s, Bill was 330 pounds, and he felt like his life was out of control. In this episode, you'll hear how he lost 140 pounds in 1985 and has maintained that weight for nearly 4 decades. He became a licensed psychotherapist specializing in weight loss and behavioral therapy. He's the author of the book, The Anderson Method, and he founded a training program where he teaches his methods for achieving permanent weight loss. I'm so honored that he agreed to chat with me. This was recorded several months back, and I'm thrilled to be able to finally share it with you now. Please enjoy my conversation with William Anderson. Bill Anderson, welcome to the Keeping It Off podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. I think you, when I started the idea for this podcast and I stumbled upon your story, I felt like you kind of you're the perfect guest, honestly, for this podcast. Seems like your story personally and the work that you've kind of dedicated yourself to is right in line with the goal of this podcast. So I'm really glad that I found your story.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's my life's work. It saved my life, and I'm very fortunate. I think I was very lucky to stumble upon what I learned when I did, because my life was out of control. I was overweight starting when I was a kid. First diet I was on was 7 years old, and that was the beginning of the problem. And it just got worse as the years went by. Lost a bunch of weight just before high school, but put it right back on and more. And same thing with college. When I went to college, I wanted to make sure I was nice and fit. So I went on a weight loss binge that summer, lost 70 pounds, I think. And as soon as I got to school, started putting it back on. And it just got worse and worse and worse until it was really affecting my health. Out of control, 330 pounds, I think, in my early 30s, and started to become aware or started to get serious about the consequences it would have on my life and health. Scared myself to death. But just like all the other times, I'm going to buckle down and, the next thing I know, 6 months later, I'm 10 pounds more out of control. Mm-hmm. I was lucky that the change in my life had kind of forced me into stopping and putting a priority. It became, getting a control on this eating addiction I had, and my weight became the top priority in my life. That's what.
Yeah. And I want to dig into that quite a bit. I want to stay in the early part of your story. Was it more of an internal motivation or was it an external motivation, like people telling you that you need to lose weight? What was it that you decided, like, this is something I need to work on?
I mean, I knew I was overweight my whole life. Nobody had to tell me. And of course, a lot of people would say something. My mother, it was just an annoyance, people getting in your business about that. And then assuming that you didn't care. They all assumed, well, if he doesn't care. Well, I cared. I just couldn't get a handle on it. And when I was in my early 30s, a lot of us kind of are natural addicts. There's an old expression, too much is not enough. When I found something that I liked doing, I'd go overboard on it. And it would take over. And the first thing was food, and there were others. It finally became work. When I had to make a living and pay the bills, I found some work that I really enjoyed, and I got hooked on that. That became the center of my life, business, doing work. I had a young family, but, the work always came first. And when I would try to get a handle on something, it wasn't long before I'd throw my hands up in the air and say, well, I can't do this. And I would just go back to my behavior of using food almost like a drug. Mm. And out of control. But situations in my life just stopped me in my tracks. Business went bad, got very sick. So I was just sitting there at home, and there was no more work. I couldn't be a workaholic anymore. And it kind of like sunk in. Of course, I had been following up on my health. The checkups, doctors would always tell you, you got to lose weight, as if you didn't know that. But I think right around that time, just prior to that, I had to get an insurance policy, Keyman life insurance policy. And of course, you go for a physical to get that. And there was an Indian doctor that they had set up, and I went for this physical to get this life insurance. And he says, "You really think you're going to get life insurance?" I said, "Well, sure." And he says, "Well, how long do you think you're going to live?" And the typical thing, I think, was 76 or something like that. That's what you'd read, life expectancy. And he's Indian, and he says, "Pati." I couldn't understand what he said. Pati. And what he was saying was 40. He was saying, the way you're living, I was smoking too. You won't make it to 40. So this doctor, I knew he was telling the truth. It made an impression on me. And I started to think, man, what am I going to do? I got 2 little kids, and I can't die on them. So it was kind of like a spiritual awakening. And I had been getting kind of spiritual, not in a traditional sense with church and whatnot, but I just started realizing, that I am a part of this whole universe. We're all connected, and I'm a part of that, and decided that I am going to make health, body, mind, and spirit. That is the center of my life. It's not work. It's not making money. It's health. And I had an interest in addictions. I wanted to be a counselor when I was a kid, high school age, but family, things go. I got pushed in the direction of being an engineer, which that didn't work out either. But I had this interest, like a hobby, of studying psychology, and learned all about addictions because the cigarettes were an addiction, and approaches to addictions and approaches to control of your behavior, where you could get control of this. The idea that you just use willpower and make up your mind, that's a nice fantasy, but making up your mind doesn't change your behavior. Other things do, because the way that our minds and our habits are created or destroyed are fairly mechanical processes. And that's what our lives are, habits. So the way we live and get up in the morning and go about our day, active eating habits. I learned behavioral therapy, how to get changes in your behavior, and made up a process where I learned to basically mimic the behaviors of people who were successful. It's an old idea of psychology modeling. If somebody is successful in something, whether it's a sport or business or whatever, you study them, see what is it they're doing, and you imagine yourself like them, and you copy those behaviors. And I studied the work of some scientists who eventually became the National Weight Control Registry, where they were studying people who were successful at losing weight and keeping it off for a period of time, and started on a path of copying that behavior. And it wasn't the target wasn't eating like them, eating what they ate, because, one thing about my eating behavior is I like to eat, but I'm not going to eat stuff I don't like, and I'm not going to stop eating the things I do. And the nice thing about weight control, weight loss, is that our bodies run according to the laws of nature and science. We are an energy machine. We take in energy in terms of food, and we put it out in terms of our activities. And if we have a balance where we're taking in or putting out as much as we take in, we're going to stay at the same weight. If we are eating more than we put out in energy, we're going to gain weight. And to lose weight, you have to take in less of that energy than you're putting out. It doesn't matter what food it is. I'm going to eat what I like. I like steak. I like mashed potatoes, eggs, bacon, things like that. So I learned a method to control the amount of energy I was taking in with foods that I liked. in a pattern that I could live with. And that became a habit. And I had to work at it very hard at first, but it became so habitual. It's just the way I live now. I've maintained this weight. I took off 140 pounds, and that was 1985. And I've maintained that since, just by living with these habits that I developed over a course of training myself.
Wow.
So that's how I got there, and got professionally trained in mental health counseling, behavioral therapy, and that became the center of my life. The first thing is that saving my life had to come first before anything else. Making myself healthy, body, mind, and spirit, which those things were not on the radar when I was a young man. They were like, gee, give me a break. I don't want to hear about that. But it got serious, and that became the most important thing in my life, was making myself healthy.
Right.
And that triggered it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I know in my life and in, the people that I've started to talk to and experience, who are successful long-term, there definitely seems to be if it's not a moment, it's a period of their life where they have to, like you said, make their health the most important thing. Like it becomes the focus of everything, and everything else revolves around that. You talked about incorporating the psychology and the mental health aspect of weight loss. I think most people, when they think of weight loss, they think of or losing weight, or they want to, work on this part of their life. They think of, well, I need to go on a diet. I guess I'll just pick a diet that, seems like I could do, or I need to go to the gym. So what was it? Was it just your interest in psychology, and that was sort of what made you realize that was sort of the key? Or was it also like you tried a bunch of these diets and gym, and you just realized I just need to try something different?
Well, I had, like I said, the first diet I was on, I was 7 years old. And I think that had a lot to do with turning me into a food addict, because, it was a typical doctor's diet. Here I am, 7. My mother doesn't know much about nutrition. Doctor gives her diet, piece of paper with 3 columns on it, and breakfast is soft-boiled egg and a piece of toast, and lunch is half a cup of cottage cheese and half a pear. And, 7-year-old kid is not going to, that just became a hateful thing. And eating what I liked when I wanted to eat became the most important thing in my life. And behavioral psychology is very interesting. It's very mechanical. It's not this Freudian or Jungian stuff. It's looking at our behavior kind of like the programs that you install in a computer, because our brain is basically a computer. And the way that we develop habits is if we do something and it feels good, it creates a change in our mind where there becomes a drive to go back and do it again. That's called learning. Behaviorists have a strange concept of learning. It's not an intellectual thing. It's a conditioning thing. It's a programming thing. And that's how we develop habits. And with certain things, they become very strong habits. Things that feel good, you're going to go back and do them again, over and over and over again. And trying to stop yourself from that is a waste of time. Doing a diet that you hate is going to condition you to hate controlling your eating, hate diets. So that when we're done with the diet, man, we go back to eating with a passion. So what I had to do was train myself to eat in ways that would maintain that energy balance. Or to lose weight, you have to create a deficit. And I did that through very simple behavioral conditioning. Well, it's not so simple. There's a lot of cognitive psychology involved, self-talk, which I used to say all the wrong things to myself. I'd try a diet for a while and then quit and say, I can't do this. I'll be overweight forever. And it's funny, there's something in the back of your mind that hears that and says, okay, that's what we're going to do. We're going to be overweight forever. So there was a lot that I had to change. But, the simple fact is that your weight is a result of your behavior. And if you can brainwash yourself, condition yourself, train yourself to eat what you like in a pattern that achieves this energy balance or deficit, you're going to lose weight. And guaranteed, there's no way that you can gain weight if you don't overeat. And I know a lot of people say, well, I don't overeat. I don't eat any more than my friends do. And it'll appear that way because you don't have to overeat much to gain weight because it's calories in and calories out. So if you average out to 200 calories more per day, you're going to end up gaining, like 25 pounds a year. 4 years go by, you are at 100 pounds overweight. You go on a diet, a crazy diet or whatever, you'll lose a whole bunch of weight. And as soon as you're done with the diet, you go back to what you think is normal, which was eating too much and probably with more of a motivation than you had before. So now maybe it's 500 calories too much per day or even 1,000, which is easy to do. People don't realize how many calories they're putting in their body. They don't want to think about it. I was one of those. It didn't take me long when I was a kid with these diets. I hated the word calorie, and because what it meant is I had to pay attention to what I was eating and restrict myself if I was going to be successful. I didn't want that. Eventually, and I guess it's part of this spiritual reality, I gave up thinking that somehow I could get around the laws of nature. And it didn't seem fair to me that, I couldn't eat the way I felt like eating. But I finally gave up. I cannot fool nature. I can't get around that. I can't deny. I have to live with it. So I had to live with this reality that I only needed probably 2,400 calories a day, and which I could eat in a meal. It was easy. I'd have a bag of chips on the way home from work, 1,500 calories, and come home and my mind said, well, I haven't eaten yet.
Right.
And so all that had to change. And you do have to have the willingness to change yourself. But it takes more than that. It's, the idea that, it's willpower. You just make up your mind. Well, no, it's not that easy because you have other forces driving your behavior. And just making up your mind didn't work for me. I had to use those forces like behavioral psychology, kind of like self-hypnosis in some cases, to make those changes happen. And, the dietitians would say, well, just listen to your body. Well, when I listen to my body, I could eat 3,000 calories a day, no sweat. So my body was not telling me to eat less. It was telling me to eat more. So I had to put something else in charge. What I started training people in this method that I developed. The first thing you do is you have to start learning how many calories am I putting in my body? Writing down what you're eating.
Yeah, I'm curious about that because I know, you said you went through your journey in 1985. And it makes me think of, there's a lot of tools nowadays that people can use between apps on their phone or specialized food that comes already prepackaged and you know exactly what you're eating. What was that like for you doing that process 40 years ago? And then, at the same time, we also live in a hyper, I think they call it obesogenic environment now, right? So maybe it's harder for people nowadays as well to resist all the delicious food that we have that's so, calorie dense.
Well, that hasn't changed. I mean, we've always lived in an obesogenic environment. Maybe we are subjected to more advertising. Certainly, if you are using a cell phone on a regular basis or looking at it all day, you're just slamming your brain with all of these messages. But television did that anyway. 70% of the commercials on television were food. And in terms of it being different there have been no changes in the science that relates to your weight control in 100 years, calories in, calories out. But people have no idea how many calories there are in the foods that they eat. So the first thing that you have to do, no matter what method you're going to establish, is you have to find out how many calories you've been putting in your body. And that takes, that's a pain in the neck, but it pays off if you keep tracking, what you're eating. And no guilt. We don't believe in guilt. Maybe if you kill somebody, you should be guilty, but, eating a cupcake is nothing to feel guilty about. But find out how many calories you're putting in your body. People are amazed. The first week in my training, that's all they do. They learn because there are reading assignments every week, but they write down what they're eating. They find out how many calories are in it. And the end result or the end target is to learn how to eat what you like to eat in amounts that will keep you from gaining weight. And it's nice to think, particularly, I can get somebody else to do this for me, like buying the foods, prepackaged foods and things like that, or going to a weight trainer. But you can't get anybody else to do this work. You're the only person that can do the work. So in terms of the foods, one thing I realized about myself, and everybody has to realize this, that you're going to have to change and stick with a new way of doing things for the rest of your life. Doing something for a set period of time and then going back to what made you overweight is not going to work. So you have to work with something that you can live with for the rest of your life. And even though you do have these prepared meals, you got to ask yourself, am I going to live that way for the rest of my life? In some cases, they can be worked in. I would have, lean cuisines on hand for lunch at the office. You pop them in the microwave, 220 calories, something like that. An easy way to get by. I'm not going to eat those every day the rest of my life, but they can fit in somewhere. And I am not going to do without Thanksgiving Day with turkey, dressing, gravy, pumpkin pie. I'm going to do that on Thanksgiving Day. And I've learned how to do Thanksgiving Day in a way that does not have me consume too many calories. So we have to learn how to live with that.
You said something that really stuck out to me in terms of you have to view your changes that you're making in the lens of this is for the rest of my life. It's not a short-term diet, right? Now that you have transitioned to not only going through that yourself, but you're also helping people, along their journey, how common do you think that is? Because I feel like, at least in my life and a lot of what I've seen, especially all the marketing that we see, it's constantly, marketed and sold to us as like this is just this thing you have to do. It's only 30 days to lose weight. It's only, 6 weeks to your dream body or whatever it is. And it's this short time. And also the before and after picture, like we see so many of those on social media. It's just do this, you get to this weight or whatever, and everything's fixed. How do you shift from, how do people successfully shift from, doing this for a little bit of time and then everything will be better versus I have to do this, forever?
This idea that this is all I have to do and I'll solve my problem. It's an appealing thing, just take this pill, eat this thing, and you'll solve your problem. You have to realize this is a lie. There is no such thing as a magic pill or 30-day diet that's going to solve my problem. And accepting that truth is difficult, especially when they keep hanging it out in front of you. Oh, you don't have to accept that truth. You don't have to change. So we have to be honest with ourselves and not participate in that lie that they have, that you only have to do this for a set amount of time. You have to work with something that you can live with. If you can't live with it for the rest of your life, it's not going to work. The key is that it's got to be enjoyable. And I enjoy the way I eat now more than I ever did when I was overweight. I am a recovered compulsive overeater. Too much is not enough. chips, cookies, cakes, ring dings, Oreos, salted nuts. Oh my God. Those are the worst. But I would just consume. And it was physically, sensually, it was pleasurable, but I wasn't happy. It didn't make me feel good. Now my eating makes me happier, feeling good, better than anything else. And that's the thing. If you want to do something that you can do for the rest of your life, you got to find something that makes you feel good. It's enjoyable. That's the key to creating habit and behavior. It's got to be rewarding to you. A behavior that's rewarded will be repeated. That's the basic first law of behaviorism. And if you're doing something that makes you sick and it's rewarding, that's a bad combination because you're going to get hooked on something that makes you sick. So, I have a way of eating that is very rewarding, a way of living that's very rewarding. I'm still a food nut. I'm more of a food nut than I was before. We're having steak, mashed potatoes, and a salad for dinner. I'm already looking forward to it. And, part of the pattern that I've developed is that your consumption, what you take in every day, has to happen in meals. I train my clients to have meals where you take in your calories, and then the rest of the time you're fasting. Nothing goes in except non-caloric stuff, diet soda, water, stuff like that. When you sit down for a meal, that's when you take in your calories. And then when you're done with the meal, you're fasting until your next meal. So, I look forward to what I'm having like nobody does, and I enjoy it. And it's the key to conditioning. The way that you train yourself to have habits is you have to find something that is rewarding to you rather than a punishment. Diets were always a punishment for me. And, when you punish, you create an aversion. You want to stay away from that. So, if you create a way of living that makes you feel good, honestly, and does not deny you pleasure, because we need pleasure. If we don't get pleasure in life, we're not going to be okay. So you've got to have a way of living that gives you pleasure without making you overweight. And that's how you develop a pattern that you can live with for the rest of your life. If you're doing something that makes you feel good and it doesn't hurt you, why not do it the rest of your life?
Right. So, in your own journey and then also in people you're helping, how long is it until there is a new normal, I guess you could say? Because I know in my life, I've changed behaviors and patterns for a month, 6 months, sometimes maybe longer. But is there a moment or a period of time where, for you personally, it was like, well, this is my new normal. This is almost gets easier, or is it always the same struggle?
No, it's not a struggle. There's work, but it's a good job. It's good work. It's rewarding. And, of course, I use some very powerful psychological technique, but usually people within a month are saying, I got this beat. There's no way I'm going to go back to the way I was. And I had that same, it was like an aha moment, because there is a lot of work initially to get this all set up. But after a while, it starts to become the new normal, and you don't want to stop. And you start to realize, I'm doing what it takes to succeed, and it's okay. And I don't want to go back to what makes me feel bad. I can do this. Yeah. And it's usually about a month. Whereas with the diet approaches, if I made it a day, that was a big deal. But there was no time at which, when I was using a diet, that I think, I got something I can live with. I got this made. No, that never happened with those.
Yeah. Talk us through a little bit. I mean, obviously you have your book, The Anderson Method. Can you Can you give us let's say someone comes to you and has been, yo-yo dieting for years, right?
Everybody.
Right. Maybe they've been successful for, a while, but then they gained it back. I know my story is probably, common, losing weight, gaining weight, for more than a decade. How do you start them? Like you said, one of the first things is just figure out what you're eating, right? How many calories you're eating. What else do you start walking them through?
So the first thing is, without trying to control it at all, you just, for a week, and at the end of the book, you'll see it described. For a week, you don't try to eat less. You just eat normally. Eat the way you always do, because that's what we want to do. We want to get an idea of how many calories am I putting in my body. That in itself is an unbelievable learning experience. The book, the paperback, is not the training text. There's a textbook where they read a piece at a time and they do what the assignment of the work. And they're able to do that because there's a structure of the training program and they've committed to it. We actually have a therapeutic contract where they promise they're going to do their homework, and it takes them through that step at a time. Now, the paperback is not that, because I know, people could not read that textbook. It wouldn't do them any good. They wouldn't even get through the first chapter. They'd throw it away, and say, I can't do this. So the paperback tells what the program is, what's in the program. And I try to make it easy to read, little short chapters, try to make it entertaining. Doesn't make any demands of anybody. It doesn't make anybody feel bad about themselves because they eat too much. It's a book that tells what's in the program. And I never thought people could just read this paperback and then apply it, because I would have a hard time doing that. I would hate to tell you how many self-help books I got where I didn't get through the first chapter and said, this is crazy. I can't do this. So this is enjoyable to read. And by the end of it, I tell them, well, if you want to try to apply it, here's what you got to do. And it's very specific. I was surprised when I started getting mail from people who said that they succeeded just reading the book. I mean, it amazed me. I don't think I could do that, but they did. That first week, I also teach them about the thermodynamics involved, which is very, very important to learn about and accept. Thermodynamics just relates to the physical process of the calories in, calories out. Simple. Not so simple to actually make happen, but I teach them how many calories that they burn each day. And the simple fact, if you eat more than that, you're going to store it in terms of fat. If you eat less than that, then you're going to start eating your own fat, basically is what it is. And there is a website that applies what's called the Mifflin-St. George equation, where you plug in your age, your sex, and this is important, the weight that you want to be. You don't want to learn how to eat that maintains the weight you already have. You want to learn how to eat in a way that maintains the weight you want to keep the rest of your life. So it asks your age, your sex, your height, and it also has an activity level. That's another matter. It doesn't make any sense to do activity that you're not going to do the rest of your life. This idea, I'm going to, work it off, and I'm going to go to the gym 5 hours a day. The thing you got to ask yourself, can I live with that? No. And most of us are sedentary. We don't burn that many calories. So you plug in your level of activity and it will give you your metabolic rate. So what they're doing is they have an awareness during the week, whether it's 1,800 calories a day or 2,500 calories a day, that is what they're going to have to live with for the rest of their life. You got to keep it under this. And then they're keeping track of their calories. And like I said, if you know that you can't eat more than 2,500 calories and you have breakfast and it's 1,200, this is not going to work. Not to mention the other things. Like I used to be able to sit down and eat a can of cashews. 10-ounce can of cashews, not even thinking about it, just sitting there eating. That's 1,500 calories all by itself. And
Right.
to me, that was a snack, So they're looking at, and they're also surprised a lot of the times by things that they've been told, oh, you can't eat that. That's a bad thing. And they're not that bad. There's a lot of foods that have a bad reputation that aren't really nothing wrong with them at all. So that's a week of discovery that they have. And then the second week, it's a matter of planning. You gotta sit down and figure out how the heck am I going to get myself, could be 1,000 calories a day or 1,500 calories a day. If you undereat to that degree, you're going to lose weight. You're going to burn, if your metabolic rate is 2,500 and you only eat 1,500, you're going to lose 1,000 calories of fat a day. And your body fat has 3,500 calories in a pound of body fat. So if you burn off 1,000 calories a day for 7 days, you're going to lose 2 pounds of body fat. And you got to feel good about that. And that's what you look at in terms of your success. You don't look at the scale. The scale is a devil because it goes up and down with your water weight. If you're holding water, it's going to go up. If you drink a glass of water, it's going to go up a pound. And you shouldn't feel guilty about that. So it's the calories that you look at to measure how am I doing.
A lot of what you're saying reminds me of sort of taking it's a process of taking ownership of the things we're putting in our bodies, and just like the awareness, the making better choices. I'm curious if that's a hard process for people to go through, to like sort of say it's something I have to change about myself, versus a lot of diets that I see are sort of put the blame on something out there. Like it's carbs, right? There, if you just go on a low carb diet, carbs are the enemy, or maybe it's lectins, or if it's high fats, or it's something exterior to ourselves that's the problem, rather than, saying, well, it's, there's lots of ways you could, lose weight, but the common factor with with everything is me, right? It's myself. It's how I eat. And so
I am responsible. This is a issue. Again, there's 12 sections of the textbook. Only 2 of them have anything to do with food or exercise. The others have to do with the way we think. And what you're talking about, it's kind of a spiritual process where you take responsibility for yourself. You say, I am responsible. I'm the one that has to make this happen. I can't hire somebody else to make me successful. I can't hire a gym guy or a dietitian. I'm the one that has to do the work. That's a degree of maturity, of progressing on a developmental level to adulthood, where you don't look for somebody else to solve the problem. You say, I'm the one that has to solve this problem. You can get some help, but it's not anybody else's fault. It's not anybody else's responsibility. And I don't like the idea of assigning fault or blame. It does no good. We do have to be honest with ourselves and say, I'm the one that made the mistake. But we don't have to beat ourselves up. It's better to be forgiving. Like, I made a mistake. Sue me. I'll do the best I can to correct it.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. That is a major issue that we have to come to and meet, to take responsibility for what it is that we want in life. Nobody else, whatever it is, whether you want success with your health or in your job, in business, you can't look for somebody else to make it happen. Like I said, you can get people to help you, but you're the cause. You have to look at that. Say, I am going to be the cause. I'm not going to get somebody else to cause me to be successful. And for a long time, that's the way I thought. I'm going to hire somebody to make me successful. No.
Mm-hmm.
You have to take on that responsibility yourself.
Yeah. Something I wanted to ask you about is some of the new medical tools that we have access to. So, you know that I decided to have weight loss surgery as part of my journey. We also have really powerful, weight loss medications now that didn't exist, a few years ago. I've talked to people who have been on them and had great success with them. And sometimes people say to me, well, I don't feel like I changed that much. I just felt less hungry, and I didn't feel like I had to do a lot. So how would you say we should view using some of those tools as tools, right? Not as the thing that fixes our problem, but as ways to help us along the journey?
Yeah. No, I am all in favor of using anything to make this possible and doable for a person, whether it's weight loss surgery or the medications. If you can find something that can save your life and help you, that's a good idea. But still, whether it's surgery or whether it's using medications that help you to reduce your eating drive, you're still going to have to develop behavior patterns that you can live with the rest of your life that will keep you from taking in more calories than you need. So that still has to be done. I understand people saying, well, I didn't change that much. Well, they weren't aware of what they were doing before. That's one of the things. Something changed. There's no way. These medications don't raise your metabolism. That's not what they do. What they do is they reduce your eating drive. And some people have such a problem with eating drive, compulsive overeaters, and like an addiction, that it's like next to impossible to get themselves to stop wanting to eat. And that is a terrible devil if you want to take weight off. So if there is a medication that can reduce that drive to make it easier for you to stay with an eating plan that helps you, that's all well and good. And the surgery, sometimes it's absolutely necessary. I've had clients who they worked with my program, they worked their tail off at it, but they weren't getting far enough, fast enough. They had physical problems that, this person's going to die if they don't get this weight off now. We don't have time. It took me 18 months to lose the 140 pounds the way I did it, and that's fast.
Mm-hmm.
And some people don't have that. So, we got to stay alive. Another client lost their mobility. They couldn't walk anymore. And, it gets depressing. They got so depressed. We're at risk here. Life is at risk. So we get, if there's some way we can fix this and we need to fix it now, we do it. But they're still going to have to learn how to control their behavior. So they're still going to have to learn all of the psychological tricks. Some people call them their tricks, but they're techniques to develop self-control. That's really what it is. Again, it's not willpower. It's not, I'm just going to, no, you have to train your brain to work in a different way and drive you in a different direction. So when you do what you feel like doing, you're doing what keeps you from gaining weight. That's what we want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good. So, I think we're coming to the conclusion of our talk today, but I'm curious if there's anything that we didn't cover that you wish we would have talked about.
I guess there is something that I should mention, that the way that we think about ourselves, our self-image, our body image, is very important. And visualization is a very powerful tool. People describe it as a one of the CBT methods. Others say it's a self-hypnosis method, but it's easy to do. If you can get yourself to start daydreaming about being fit, your target is 200.
Or so, yeah, I'd like to be, kind of a muscular 200.
Yeah. Okay. So if you can spend a couple of minutes a day doing nothing but daydreaming about yourself at 200, and if you can get a visual image to help you do that, a picture of a muscular guy who's the same shape that you want to be in, and you imagine yourself that way, or even just looking down at your body and imagining, what is this going to look like when I take this weight off? I used to, when I was overweight, I had hands where my knuckles were like dimples, they were like, my hands were like balloons, and I started noticing that these skinny people, you could see their knuckles. And you could see these things in their hands, So I started looking at my hands and trying to imagine, what would it look like if I took that layer of fat off? If you can get yourself, it's a simple thing. It's not, you can pay a psychologist and go for, meditation or training and visualization, but it's something that all kids do. Little kids daydream about themselves as, Captain America or something. And that does something in us that changes us on an unconscious level. And that's important because most of what goes on in our lives is done by an unconscious mind. It's not your will. It's not your conscious mind that's doing it. It's something else that is pushing you in that direction. So that's a very simple thing. And that's where, seeing before and after, other people have done it. You can, in imagining yourself doing that, being a before and after picture, that can help.
Yeah.
And we got to stop doing it in the wrong way. My God, I'm going to be just like Uncle Enoch. We were imagining ourselves old and fat. We don't want to do that.
Right.
We want to look around for role models that are the way we want to be.
Yeah, we use our imagination all the time in, like you said, like sort of the worst case scenario or shaming ourselves. And so using those same tools to, to move them in a positive direction and use the power of our imagination to say, what will this be like when I reach my goals? That's a powerful technique.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot out there, and they don't sound very scientific. Daydreaming about yourself at the weight you want to be. Come on, that can't really do anything. But those are the sort of things that have people a couple of weeks later saying, I got this beat, and if they were to keep doing that, they do have it beat. Sometimes they stop because these goofy things, daydreaming like a kid, well, I'm not going to do that. And they go back to being afraid of getting bigger than ever, which is the same thing. I mean, it's in the wrong direction. So the way we think, that's what cognitive behavior is. Cognitive, thinking behavior. That's the most important thing that we have to change. More important than changing our body. Lots more important. And you'll, as you go through that book, you'll bump into a number of these ideas. Some of the most important ones in there are things that I've had people say, that's a bunch of baloney. They don't, that's hocus pocus. No, this is psychology. This is reality. The way we think is important.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. Where can people find you online if they want to, learn more about your work, if they want to check out your book or any of the other stuff you have going on?
Well, I'm a licensed mental health counselor. So the letters after my name are LMHC. So if they just Google William Anderson, LMHC, they'll get pages of stuff. And there's plenty to read on. I have a website. The website is The Anderson Method. If they Google The Anderson Method, they should find my website really easily. And I have a lot of articles, that are very informative, that are listed on a table of contents there. So yeah, it should be very easy to find me.
Awesome. Well, Bill, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I hope you'll consider coming back in the future. And really appreciate your time today.
Be happy to.
If you're still here, a few quick things before we end. If you found this content helpful or valuable and you'd like to support the show, there are 2 ways you can do that. First, you can help grow the audience by sharing this episode on social media or even send it directly to a friend that you think would enjoy it. Second, you can leave a 5-star review on whatever podcast app you're listening with. If you'd like to be a guest on Keeping It Off, you'll find a link in the show notes to a simple form you can fill out, and I'll be in touch. One other note, this show is for information only, not medical advice. I'm not a medical professional, so please check with your doctor before making any changes in your healthcare. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you'll come back and check out another episode of Keeping It Off.